live stream. So let me just give some framework for today as you're putting your introductions in the chat. I appreciate you doing that. My name is H.G. Chazelle. I'll be your host for the discussion today. I run a stakeholder engagement platform called Advanced Energy Group. The purpose of Advanced Energy Group is to develop effective stakeholder engagements that enable leaders like yourself to align on critical obstacles that stand in the way of achieving our needed urgent goals regarding climate, health, energy, and equity. More and more in cities and states, we're making aggressive goals, commitments, promises that don't have really any social infrastructure for delivery. What I mean by that is we need to have forums where all relevant stakeholders can discuss what is the next most important immediate step to be taken so that we can be on pace to successfully deliver on these promises of complete decarbonization in just a few years, or electrification, and done in a way that puts equity first. If we're not talking among ourselves and questioning the silos and perspectives that we come from, we're not going to get to that point of understanding or ability to prioritize, to triage, and go after the things that are most important first. And so we recently did one of our stakeholder challenges. And when we did this stakeholder challenge, we focused on clean transportation. It was the Clean Transportation Summit. And I see everybody's joining. The one challenge for me, Jess, is if we are live streaming, is that I'm not sure if you have the deck up yet.
Yes, I do have the deck up and it is up on LinkedIn. So just let me know when you'd like me to advance and I can go ahead and do that.
Perfect. I'm just looking for where I can see it, though, on my screen. Well, I mentioned that this monitor died on me. Let me see if that brings me back to being able to see those on my screen. So, for some reason, I see you, but I don't see the slides. Ken, do you see the slides?
Yep.
Okay.
Well, I did. It just disappeared.
Oh.
They're back.
They're back.
They're back.
All right. So this is exciting. I'm going blind here, but this is good. So
we want to go onto the agenda?
Yeah, let's go. So the agenda here is let me just go, maybe I'll follow through. So let's go to the welcome slide. I can share. I'm on slide 3. So as I mentioned, what we're going to talk about today is an outcome from our session, Northeast Clean Transportation Summit, that we did on November 16th, where we had an incredible kind of array of speakers representing all different facets of this discussion on clean transportation and mobility. And one of the challenges to the room was, what is that critical obstacle regarding citywide fleet electrification that we should prioritize solving together within the next 12 months that would account for a commitment on equity as well as decarbonization? So if you look on the right, you see the speakers that were involved in this discussion. Just an incredible array of perspectives and experience. This discussion itself, please advance to slide 4, was made possible by our sponsors, who, as you can see, represent not just utilities or city agencies, but also hospitals and regulatory bodies and city government coming together to try to align on what is that critical obstacle to solve. So if you can go to the next slide, ultimately our framework for our workshops is a 3-part challenge. We challenge speakers to present what they say is the critical obstacle. We then challenge the audience to align on what that critical obstacle is. And then once we have agreement on the obstacle to solve in the next 12 months, we challenge the audience to come up with a pathway that would be most effective to overcome that obstacle, both at a 12-month objective level and then at a 90-day sprint level. And once the audience, in this case, 128 leaders, have agreed or aligned on those 2 components, we ask the room who's willing to volunteer to be a part of a volunteer task force to actually deliver that 12-month objective in 90-day sprint. And we had nearly 20 leaders volunteer to be a part of a task force to get this done. Ken Jack volunteered to be the task force lead for this group. And he's supported by members you'll see today on this call in terms of moving forward and delivering that 12-month objective and 90-day sprint. So with that, Ken, if I could, I'll hand it over to you for an introduction and more information about the objectives of this task force.
Sure. Thanks, HG. Just for those of the folks on the line that don't know me, Ken Jack, I have spent better part of 30 years involved with fleet operations, fleet management for large utilities, both regional and national. I've got a fair bit of background in the utility and planning space itself as well, so I understand the infrastructure pretty well. And I've been involved with AEG for a number of years and have participated in a number of prior challenges. As HG alluded to, we do a bunch of work in a number of swim lanes around grid reliability, transportation, environmental justice, and the event that we had in November, and we've got a number of folks here that participated in that, spent some time thinking about what is one of the big obstacles to achieving, accelerated transformation of our transportation infrastructure, especially in New York City. And as you can, I think we want to go to the next slide. We could just talk through the obstacle statement. Is that we needed, I don't want to read it to you, but creative policy and unique solutions for fleet charging and truck parking. When you think about the needs of commercial fleets and all the business that move through various industrial business zones, Zariga Avenue being an example, there are a number of unique needs for those commercial fleets. And we started talking through what would be necessary in order to stimulate those fleets to start to transition to electric vehicles. As HG mentioned, we try to divide this up into manageable material sorts of, deliverables so that we can kind of keep ourselves on track and keep towards progress. Our 90-day objective was to pull together this stakeholder roundtable, and probably with others to follow, with a number of stakeholders from the community, from various industries, to talk through some of the things that we've seen so far and bring some additional insight, we hope, to the conversation around the need for electrification of fleets in business zones. And in 12 months, the goal is to submit a proposal or roadmap for the optimization of this process. There are a lot of different folks that have to be involved and engaged at different stage gates in order for this to work smoothly. And we want to put together a roadmap that could be emulated in other business zones, but starting with the Zariga Avenue area. And this would be inclusive of long-term agreements, integrated value propositions, and stakeholder support, meaning not just the businesses that are converting their fleets, but in terms of the folks that are supporting the build of the infrastructure, jobs, and reskilling perhaps for the community or surrounding the areas where these projects. We really want this to be a holistic solution that really makes sure that we're getting benefit for the community, benefit for the businesses, as well as everybody that's participating in the transition. And so we have a number of folks that are meeting every couple of weeks to advance this goal, and part of that is bringing everybody else along and hearing from the stakeholder community at large, and that's a part of what we're going to do today. So I've got a number of folks that are going to talk through some observations and talk about some of the work that they're already doing relative to this, and we definitely want to open the conversation to hear from others.
Great, thank you, Ken. So let's go to the next slide. And a funny thing happened on the way to our first roundtable. There was a DOE Community Energy Innovation Prize that was open and available. So given that, we decided to jump in and throw our hat in with this project so that we could expand our engagement. And what I really appreciated about working with everybody who you'll see featured on slide 7 is that we work together to think about what are the different strengths, expertise, perspectives we would all bring to supporting a series of community engagements that could lead to a new approach for industrial business zones to be really clean energy hubs, where they would be the places where you would see the greatest advancement, support from public to private sectors to electrify medium and heavy duty fleets. And that could then somehow get created into a replicable framework to go to the 20 other industrial business zones in New York. And frankly, this is a model that could serve every major city that has unique zoning for industrial manufacturing zones. And now why would they be important? Well, when you start to look at the profile of these industrial business zones and the makeup of the communities that they are in or bisect, you start to see some glaring common denominators. And primarily the one to take into account is the health impacts of these industrial business zones on the communities around them. So Zarega Avenue Industrial Business Zone is right in the Castle Hill neighborhood of the Bronx. Castle Hill is home to 22,000 families, over 6,000 residents. When you start to look at the health profile and social determinants of health related to this area, it has some of the worst asthma hospitalizations in the state, if not the country. Just think about thousands of trucks constantly going through these neighborhoods, back and forth to these industrial business zones. Then the other piece here is, how does these industrial zones create any opportunities for wealth creation in these communities in terms of new job opportunities or new opportunities to upskill in terms of labor? Those were also opportunities that we saw with focusing on how to reimagine an industrial business zone as actually a magnet for clean energy infrastructure, innovation, and workforce. So those were some of the pieces we put together into our proposal to the Department of Energy, which we submitted on February 2nd. We'll know March 7th whether our proposal was accepted. The basic framework of the proposal was a series of community engagements, roundtables in person and online, that could best align the right players to figure out where is the win-win here between private industry, between city in terms of zoning, trucking operators, and also the community. And if you look at anything related to federal funding right now, there's the concept of the community benefits agreement. So how could we take that framework and apply it to creating a community benefits agreement roadmap for the electrification of industrial business zones? And that became, I think, the cornerstone of our approach with our application. And if you go to the next slide, I think you can see what were the key outcomes that we presented in the application. Well, first from these series of engagements would be this electrified IBZ Community Benefits Agreement roadmap. How to do this, not only for Zarega Avenue, but how could you do it repetitively across other IBZ areas? Now, along the way, because right now there is a medium heavy duty electric vehicle charging infrastructure motion before the Department of Public Services in New York, this became an opportunity to ongoingly submit as comments or filings to the commission the work of this group in making progress along this path to create this roadmap. This would give it a better opportunity to get more visibility, not just for New York City, but also what's happening for Buffalo, for their industrial zones. So a commitment by this group to have constant interactions or input to this filing. The third outcome here was to bring all of the layers of data necessary to see where the real opportunities are, or the real pathway to create these win-wins. Do it with a GIS framework. That's Geospatial Information System framework, which would enable you to see in real time the different layers that all need to come together to find the areas of most important priority. So you have your social determinants of health layer. You're going to have layers related to hosting capacity from the utility. You'll have layers relating to location of the fleets that are in this area as well, air quality, all having it come together in one story map. And finally, from every one of the sessions we would do, we'd be collecting all the online informational assets. So whether it's interviews with the speakers, recordings from the stakeholder engagements themselves, summaries of what were the results from those sessions, putting that all together in an educational kit that could support other communities and ecosystems around industrial business zones so that they could be successful in doing this as well. And then finally, the fifth outcome here was to take the general roadmap and approach and identify at least one specific site within the industrial business zone where this could be moved forward with a specific benefits agreement that would clearly demonstrate a benefit to the Castle Hill community in the form of workforce development support, a benefit in terms of to the fleet operator of why they would lean in on this as well. So that was the ultimate fifth goal, was that site-specific benefits agreement as an outcome of the roadmap and approach. So those are the outcomes. I think from here, it'll probably be helpful to give you more context. And the person I think would be great to do that, we could go to the next slide, please, is Zach Miller. He's the director for Metro Region Operations for the Trucking Association of New York. Welcome, Zach.
Thank you. Thanks, HG, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. You could advance the slide, please. So, as HG mentioned, I am Zach Miller, the Director of Metro Region Operations for the Trucking Association of New York. Next slide, please. And I just want to make sure you all have my contact information, email, phone, and the episode of our podcast, Trucking Association of New York's official podcast, Key Up New York, episode 5, we talked about the infrastructure needed for medium and heavy duty electric vehicles. We had Jeff and Brian Wilkie from National Grid on, so I certainly encourage people to check out that podcast. You're going to find it really, really interesting, and it does tie into some of the issues we're going to be discussing today. Next slide, please. So one thing that's really, really important is the lack of overnight truck parking. And as we like to say, if trucks can't park today, they can't charge tomorrow. So solving the overnight truck parking shortage, not only is it going to help make our supply chain and our freight network more efficient today, but it will set the stage for the charging capabilities that we're going to need to see as more electric commercial vehicles come online. Now, it's really important to note that all commercial truck drivers must follow the federal hours of service regulations, which require drivers to take 10 hours of off-duty time following 14 hours of on-duty time before they can drive again, which is why we have seen such an influx of trucks parked in residential areas or along the shoulder of highways and places where they really shouldn't be. They are regulated by the federal government to basically shut down when they're getting close to their hours. There used to be a way for them to show a little bit more discretion when they had logbooks, but now that everything is electronic, it really is, when you're running out of time, you're running out of time, and you just need to find a place to pull over to get your rest. To that end, there is only one commercial truck parking spot for every 11 trucks on the road nationally. And of course, in our dense urban areas like New York City, that is exacerbated. And understandably, people don't want trucks parking in their communities. And we understand it. We respect that. And trucks really shouldn't be there. So we really need to overcome that obstacle of solving that shortage. And you could advance the slide, please. And what's really exciting about this task force is, in addition to following the playbooks that AAG is so good with, New York City kind of instituted something like this recently to get an overnight truck parking bill done. Southeast Queens residents called for action on illegal truck parking. It has been an influx in their community since around the pandemic. Tanny joined their coalition to seek solutions to this issue. The city council joined in, and together we passed a groundbreaking overnight truck parking bill, which will create at least 3 off-street truck parking facilities in New York City by 2026, which will triple the amount of truck parking locations there are in New York City currently, which is really, really exciting. But as we know, there are a lot of trucks on the road in New York City. And real estate is at a premium here. So although that's a wonderful start, that's not going to solve the problem. We need to do more, and the 21 industrial business zones represent a perfect opportunity to do that. You could advance the slide, please. So it's really important to take a snapshot of the 21 IBZs we have in the city, and why Zarega is the perfect one to start looking at for this. So as you can see, Zarega is the 9th most active IBZ by truck activity, contributing about 5% of the total goods moved throughout the city. And the big ones, you could see JFK, Hunts Point, North Brooklyn, Maspeth, they do get a lot more, I would say, coverage in terms of initiatives, and we mentioned Southeast Queens. It was because of JFK. So that said, there's still a lot of IBZs that don't get as much attention, don't have as much freight moving through, but still have a pretty significant amount. And Zarega, of the, I guess we'll call them the back half of the IBZs, is one of the biggest and most prominent, and of course, is so close to the Hunts Point IBZ that finding a solution at Zarega really can serve as that ideal template for the rest of the IBZs, and then hopefully nationwide. So you can advance that slide, please. And it's important to note sort of why there are so many truck trips that come into New York City. The national average is about 73% truck tonnage in terms of freight. New York City is closer to 90%. And one of the reasons for that is that we don't manufacture as much here. As you can see from this slide, we do still manufacture, and those smaller manufacturers need goods and products coming in and going out. But so much does have to be brought into the city. And as I mentioned, with the truck parking facilities, real estate is at a premium here. So our retailers don't really have the ability to allocate a whole lot of square footage to storage, which means that more and more supplies need to be trucked in. And we could look at that graph at the types that are coming in here. But the land use and the freight generation is a really big factor here in why New York City generates so much truck traffic, and why these sort of solutions to make it more efficient, more sustainable are so vital. You can advance the slide, please. And I do want to talk about some of the specific truck trips, right? So on average, it's over 103,000 truck trips across the Bronx. We see where that is most heavily on I-95. And it's the commercial corridors and the local truck routes that are a little bit lower, but still pretty significant. And I'd like to close off by pointing out that when you look at the top violations that trucking companies receive in the Bronx, one of the biggest ones is, in fact, illegal overnight truck parking. So here it is, it comes full circle, and the opportunity for us to solve that overnight truck parking. We see it's a problem in communities today. We know it's a problem for the industry. This is a way to get them out of neighborhoods today, have truckers meet their hours of service, have a safe place to park, and let the utilities, let the governments know that, hey, they're taking advantage of this parking. They're staying in the IBZs. It's easier to start planning for those freight trips in the IBZs. Let's get that charging capability up, and let's get more medium and heavy duty commercial vehicles transition to electric.
Thank you, Zach. I appreciate the context that you're giving us here with these IBZs. And just out of curiosity, you're dealing with New York. Do they go under another name or framework, let's say for Buffalo?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. I think it's usually something related to industry. So like an industrial zone, industrial business zone, things like that is usually how it's called.
Okay. I noticed that Mark Simon is on the line. Mark, let me know if you're in a good place to talk a little bit about your experience with heavy duty trucks, medium and heavy duty fleets, and in ways to ensure that decarbonization path.
I'm ready when you are.
Oh, please, welcome. If you'd introduce yourself to the group, please.
Oh, all right. Turn on. Hi, Mark Simon here, and the Director of Electric Vehicle Policy at the New York City Department of Transportation. And what I'm going to just like to talk about a little bit is, from doing this stuff for a while of how to clean up trucks, I just want to put in some of the policy context quickly. It'll be a quick walk down memory lane, but some of, like, when I began working on this stuff, emissions regulation began to really ramp up in the late 1980s, and the focus was on NOx and PM reduction from diesel trucks. And just to give you a sense of how much progress has been made since 1990, the standard in 1990 was 6 grams of NOx per brake horsepower hour and 0.6 grams of PM. By 2007, that had dropped from 6 grams to 0.2 grams of NOx, and from 0.6 grams to 0.01 grams of PM. And an upcoming standard will drop that 0.2 grams to 0.035 grams and the 0.01 to 0.005. So bottom line, as emissions have evolved, the diesel engine has achieved all sorts of great things, but not without a significant cost, and both in dollars and in technology. You now have NOx scrubbers, you now have emissions fluid that you need, you have a PM filter, and that filter needs regeneration, and you have all sorts of operational challenges around those things. So, and now as we add, in addition to NOx and PM, we start to focus on the carbon in the fuel. Unless you're moving to a non-diesel alternative liquid fuel, electric starts to come in as a solution. And, you're trading away all of this new technology on the diesel engines for electric. And it's not a free lunch. It doesn't come without new challenges. But bottom line, if your fleet operation, is currently, say, in a dense urban center like New York, if you're a class 5, 6, 7 truck doing less than 100 miles a day, the current electric technology is likely to fit your niche, not 100%, and we all work on these issues. So why take this on? Well, we talk about community benefit and equity. The communities surrounding many of these zones have been heavily impacted by emissions over the years. Even as they've gotten cleaner, there are still issues, and there's still maintenance and trucks that unfortunately may not meet those tight standards because of whatever. And so now you don't have to worry about that. The tailpipe is non-existent. And then the second benefit, which people often forget about, is just how much quieter the trucks are. There was a study in England with MAN, and they basically, the noise levels were half of a conventional truck. They were only like 1 decibel more than a passenger vehicle. I mean, that's for the drive cycles. We're not talking about lift gates and anything. So that's sort of the nutshell there. But I also wanted to mention briefly, in the policy context, the Northeast is part of is participating in a region-wide, multi-state, medium and heavy-duty zero-emission vehicle action plan that you can find if you go on to the NESCAUM website, NESCAUM, and you can see that the states, as part of the adoption of the California emission standards, including the clean truck initiatives, is coming up with these plans and trying to develop incentives and other ways to facilitate the sale of clean or electric trucks in New York and the Northeast as a whole. So, we're not operating in a vacuum, and the excitement of starting in a place that we've worked in the past in the Bronx, and we know that there are challenges there. I mean, it's this great opportunity to kind of leverage all of that. We have, over the years, many of you have maybe participated with our Clean Truck program. That, Clean Truck program has historically taken a dirty truck, where I talked about those emission standards, something that in the beginning was pre-2007, and replace it with a new truck, so you got that giant benefit. Now the focus is, shifting more toward replacing with electric truck. And, so we have some funds for that, and Con Edison has some funds for make ready in certain situations. And, I think it's a great opportunity. So that's sort of a brief nutshell of why we're here and what we're doing from a regulatory standpoint.
Thank you, Mark. That's
Sure.
helpful to have that information and background. I think to complement what you just said on the overall landscape, it would be helpful if we hear from Brian Ross. He's Director of Policy and Market Development for BP Pulse Fleet. Previously, Brian worked at Con Edison, leading demonstration pilots on electrification of certain vehicles. So, Brian, if you're available, we'd love to get you on to get your perspective on how do we take this from theory into actually finding sites within the Zarega Avenue industrial business zone to look for win-wins that could benefit community, fleet operators, and somehow drive some progress towards workforce development.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, HG, and hi, everyone. Thank you for that introduction. So I can just get into it, because you took the first words out of my mouth, like, who am I and why am I here?
Just let us know and we'll advance for you.
Yep. Yeah, you can go ahead to the next one. I'll just give, for kind of a point of reference, what BP Pulse, the fleet electrification provider that I work for, offers fleets. So really on this wheel, a turnkey solution that gets through every phase of fleet electrification, from planning, permitting, construction, on through operations of the chargers. And I start here, in part to explain, what BP Pulse does, but also there are a lot of steps in fleet electrification. There are a lot of considerations for a fleet that is interested or otherwise compelled to electrify. And working, we at BP Pulse, we don't advise on vehicles. There are others that out there that do that, but advising on the infrastructure and helping fit to a site is really kind of the first big step as you're planning your site. You can go to the next slide, please. So I think, as HG mentioned, but if not, just to say again, the one outcome of this task force is to look at sites along Zarega Avenue, hosting fleets, and assess them for their feasibility for introducing electric vehicles and then scaling up, whether they be refuse trucks or medium heavy duty school bus vehicles, whatever they are. The expectation is that we're going to see more of these vehicles in Zarega. It's going to benefit the community. And how are we going to evaluate those sites and start to plan for that electrification. So I just threw a few things on the slide here that BP Pulse starts to walk through with customers as we're just doing some of our initial engineering of a site. Just, and the first part, actually, as I said, is one that usually customers come to us with. So what kind of vehicles are in their mix, and how I put useful life, but how old are those vehicles? Are they near replacement age? Is the addition of EVs to their fleet going to be new vehicles or replacing older vehicles, which are in some incentive programs required? And then what are the duty cycles of those different vehicles? That informs the energy requirements, what kind of charging is needed, when can they charge? There's advantages to charging overnight versus during the day based on the utility rates and incentives that are available. So that's the fleet side of things and how that will operate. When we look at a piece of property, the physical characteristics help us plan where to put that charging on the property and how and with considerations on how to scale that up over time. So first off, like the layout, where do the vehicles park relative to where they enter the property, relative to existing facilities and structures that might be temporary or permanent, meaning movable or not. One, structures that are usually not movable, existing underground utilities. So of course we'll do a site survey. Of course we'll do a title search to understand, where is the electric service coming in and what other underground water, sewer, telecom, gas, might be in the best location. And how are we going to work around that? Are we going to find a new location? Are we going to find within that site, or can we work around it? And then the space availability of chargers are only part of this infrastructure project. In Con Ed territory, the service standard in most places is 208 volts. That'll work for level 2 chargers. Some of our customers look for fast chargers, look to fast chargers for their needs. And then we need to think through on-site transformers, switch gear, power cabinets, all those electrical pieces of equipment that are part of this project. And I mentioned titles a second ago, but is the property owned? Is it leased? Are there existing easements that we may need to consider in planning the project on site? And of course, the big one is electrical service and working with Con Edison in the city, with other utilities elsewhere, obviously. But working with the utility, as HG said, I used to be with Con Edison. Approach a utility early and often was always the message we gave customers. Assessing where is the existing point of entry for electrical service. There may be more than one per property. What's the available capacity coming from the distribution system to your property? What's the existing capacity within the site's electrical infrastructure? Are there spare breaker? Is there room for spare breakers in your existing panel? Is your wiring up to taking on existing or new load? In many cases, and I'll get to it next, we look at dedicated services, new services for EV charging, and what does that look like relative to your existing operations? And then along with that conversation with the utility, you'd want to talk through, and we talk through rates and incentives available. Are there rates that would make the TCO, the total cost of ownership for your project, more attractive, better, and incentives available from the utilities that can help buy down the cost of this infrastructure? The next slide, please. And then on Zariga, we have one customer. We have a good handful of customers in the New York City area, but I thought I'd highlight our work with Pioneer Transportation. You can see the overhead shot of the bus depot along Zariga. We helped them. We provided 5 level 2 chargers to support 5 repowered buses. They've been operating there for at least a year. I think over a year now. and served by a new Con Edison service. You know, this was one where, as you can see, could have made this bigger, but as you can see the overhead of the site, there is space along kind of the perimeter of the property where buses are parked. I think, not speaking for Pioneer, but in a future scenario, we could see where there could be chargers available for buses, for more than 5 buses at this site. But one of the first assessments we did with the utility was the existing service came in off Zariga at the front of the property. We didn't want to have to trench or bore the length of the property. So, you know, this was a fairly simple math of working with the utility to find an alternate service point of entry towards the back of the property, because that's where, again, tough to see here, but there's an entrance point at the back for the new buses. And then, you know, along with providing the, you know, hardware and infrastructure build here, our software helps control the charging, you know, mainly for moving as much charging as we can off peak, so overnight charging. And then we provide some O&M at the site as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. So I think, you know, we're starting to get a better understanding of some of the constraints here. You have the aspiration to say, oh, this would be a great idea. Take these industrial business zones that were, in a way, it's a community benefits agreement in itself. Relocate your industry here. We're going to pay a certain price per employee that you bring on in this industrial business zone. And we'll be able to concentrate industrial services, manufacturing, you know, in the city and not have it leave. So that was an offer in itself, except that offer didn't take into account the consequences it had to the community that now we realize are significant and need to be incorporated. And if we're looking for ways to reset our infrastructure priorities with equity in mind, and for those on the call, just know that I haven't come up with a good definition of equity, but for the definition of inequity, it's pretty clear to me. It's asymmetric suffering, and finding ways to address asymmetric suffering, especially asymmetric suffering that's acute. That's the practice of solving for equity. And so now all of a sudden these industrial business zones, and you put a lens of suffering onto it, asymmetric suffering, you realize there are things here that really need to be addressed. You just can't have this level of hospitalizations for asthma or this level of poverty around these centers for industry and not find a way to find a path forward. And if we're going to have to create new futures anyway with electrification, how can we combine them to create this win-win? Part of the constraints will be, however, just the numbers. If you have all the hundreds of fleets, and I'm not sure the estimated vehicle count number, but I think Sarah Bugdad from Con Edison is on listening. Someone can tell you there are many, many fleets along Zurega Avenue. And for those all to electrify, say they decide to, those fleets within the next 2-3 years, that's a tremendous concentrated demand hitting this network. That could be over 40 megawatts of potential needed load right then. So finding ways to integrate this electrification in a manner that doesn't cause undue cost to the system will be essential, because that cost, if it's a utility cost, will be borne by all those who pay that bill, which could undermine the efforts here in terms of getting ahead of these issues and not only providing a healthy place to live, but also avenues to wealth creation to escape an increasing energy cost burden. So part of that will be the use of technology. So Maria, I just wanted to kind of set things up for people to see what are ways that technology can play an important role here in terms of distributed energy resources, or ways that this transition could be as thoughtful and strategic as possible. So please welcome and join us. This is Maria Fields. She's the Chief Executive Officer for Sprocket Power.
Thank you. That's the perfect lead in. I should let you just keep going. So yeah, so Maria Fields, and I work in, I'm the co-founder of Sprocket Power, and really work in implementation of what HG referred to as distributed energy resources, which is kind of an industry term. But these are basically the energy resources that are, in contrast to being centralized, they're kind of distributed. They're out in an area like Zarega Avenue, and you know, can definitely solve problems. So next slide. Oh, do you want me to just, I can just chat if you want. So the work that we do is really in this area. In some ways, the lead in that I have to talking about this is that when you look at any particular site like the one that, you know, Brian had shown, if you look at a facility like that, and you know, the kind of look of it before electric vehicle charging and after electric vehicle charging, it's basically, I've heard people from Con Ed or utilities say it's basically like becoming a small hospital. You know, these are very large loads. The nature of charging and fast charging is that it requires a lot of power quickly. So those are just inherent challenges to that. And so, as you know, the world of kind of unmanaged additions of EV charging in a fleet like you're going to see in Zarega Avenue, it causes stress, and it's really stress on both sides of the grid. And so in a way, you know, that's the backdrop for all of this. And the layer that I'll talk about is really just the economics of that picture and the economics of solutions that can help solve that and alleviate those issues. And so if you look at, there's a range of really proven technology out there, including things like managed charging, solar batteries, and incorporating and kind of integrating those technologies into what would be called a microgrid or another managed solution. So any of those can work on a particular location, what would be called behind the meter, or can be fed into the grid and provide you know, the basic for the value that they provide is really in alleviating that initial stress I was describing, and everybody's described here, you know, that the megawatt size load that could be added in Zarega Avenue, if it's unmanaged, can be tremendously stressful and expensive for everyone. But there are you know, kind of new solutions to that can help alleviate those stresses, and the benefits of that can be passed along to the, you know, a site owner or an owner of some distributed resources, and in that way, thank you. You know, in that way, this is kind of the takeaway is that these integration of technology can support better outcomes, and that you know, economic benefit can be shared, because it's basically, you know, whoever is creating that benefit can also participate in the economics of the smarter grid. And so that's an opportunity in a way for a project like this in a concentrated geographic zone to, you know, to think about things differently and to participate also in that economic benefit, as HG says. So next slide. So these are, you know, a few of the kind of resources that I was describing, and some of the challenges and the reasons that these are not widely adopted. It's complicated. These kinds of sites that we're describing here aren't traditionally very well served by the kinds of solution providers that you might see in very large, you know, industrial facilities. But now these loads are going to be fairly significant, and they warrant a more advanced technology approach. And sometimes the barriers have to do with financing that incorporates these, you know, these benefits that I'm describing. So any of these things are solvable. It's just this is what's new about it. And again, it's not the barrier is not really the technology at this point. So next slide. So one of the interesting things about New York is that there are forward-looking programs in New York that that really provide this kind of value that I'm describing, and many people would be familiar with upfront incentives that, you know, if you put something in, you might get an incentive for for doing that offsets the capital cost. But a lot of the benefits that are coming in New York and are very relevant are what I would call operating benefits. They have to do with the way this facility would function as an integrated unit within the energy system overall. So, so that is really the point of this is these distributed energy resources and the way that they can either alleviate stress or even feed back into the grid to benefit the grid. Those things are compensated now. So in New York, I think somebody has mentioned, Make Ready program. The Make Ready program is also adding some charge management approaches as eligible costs. So software and even batteries incorporated into charging can now be eligible for those Make Ready funds. The Inflation Reduction Act, which is the federal program, has benefits that are higher for clean energy projects and also for disadvantaged zones. The New York Sun and the NYSERDA battery incentive, which is coming back, are all kind of relevant upfront capital incentives. But the operating incentives are an interesting part of this. And for projects that we would model, they're probably, about half of the economic value comes from these long-term operating benefits. So there's something called the value of distributed energy resources, or the value stack, in New York that compensates for feeding energy back into the grid. And this is very much driven by when and where that's happening. And, time of use rates, which are another layer, demand response, which is a program where sites can curtail or reduce their draw on the grid at certain times of high stress and get paid for that. And increasingly, there will be carbon offsets and carbon markets going forward. So all of those operating incentives are going to rely on measurement and control and, and kind of an awareness of the grid stresses. And that technology, again, is kind of out there and ready to be used. And for a project like this, the exciting thing is to think of ways that can be provided as a benefit, not only to the particular site, but to the overall project, and to demonstrate how that benefit can be shared.
Thank you, Maria. Yeah, I think it's important that we keep that in mind as we go through this process. I think to Matt Berlin, who runs NICE School Bus Project, where they have a location where they're working to electrify this portion of school buses on Zarega Avenue. And one of the challenges was finding a way to strategically kind of onboard those electrified school buses in a way that didn't trigger hitting a constraint with the grid. So they looked at things like load management, ways to optimally charge those school buses in a manner that didn't cross a threshold, causing the need for infrastructure investment prior to them being ready. So that's all requiring a level of data share that currently just doesn't exist. This world right now that we're talking about is very siloed. And so helping all the key stakeholders understand the value of data sharing right now to get to best possible outcomes is essential. And that's part of the objective of the series of roundtables that we applied for with this grant, was to enable that to happen. Otherwise, you're calculating opportunities or risks only based on what you can see in your little silo, versus understanding by doing this in conjunction with 2 or 3 other critical bodies, you can achieve an outcome far better than just doing it within your own zone. And one way that I think we can be very helpful with this process is helping people have an integrated view of exactly what we're talking about. The consequences of not getting it right, the potential of getting it right, and the value. And so in our application, we outlined that we would be trying to do this using GIS information and data layers to make this very accessible and understandable to all the parties involved, and replicable to any other IBC zone that would take this on. They would have this roadmap that had this playbook of how to create your GIS framework for the endeavor. So Nate, if you don't mind just talking a little bit more about the vision there. You see Nathaniel Putnam, he is the Chief Technology Officer for Greenbridge Corporation.
All right. Thank you, HG. Thanks, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Nate Putnam, and I'm the CTO of a clean energy developer called Greenbridge. And the reason I wanted to take a lead on this deliverable is that I've really seen the value in my current job and in my prior role of using data and modeling and optimization to really support holistic decisions that make the better economic outcomes and better energy outcomes for everybody involved. So you can go to the next slide, please. Or I just have one slide. So I really appreciated Brian's comments about project planning, and that he provided an example of making the right decisions for a given project for involving those school buses. And as Maria pointed out, solar and battery DERs can play a really useful role alongside utilities in getting enough power to a site while reducing expensive upgrades to power infrastructure. So that's near and dear to my heart in our business as a clean energy developer. But DERs can play a really important role and make the whole thing more economically viable and less carbon intensive for everybody. So our goal for Zarega is really even more holistic than a single project or a single fleet operator, because we're trying to involve multiple fleets of different types that are co-located on Zarega. We're trying to bring in the workforce that supports and uses these fleets, and even the surrounding communities. Of course, there are a lot of spatial constraints, as Zach pointed out, in terms of locating trucks long enough for them to charge. And of course, there are a lot of economic constraints as well, because these fleets are critical parts of the schools and the businesses that use them. And those businesses and schools have their own economic constraints, limiting some of their activities. So how do we take all of these stakeholders and basically provide the information that can be available to folks to actually take action and take the right action and make the right decisions based on all the data that's involved? So part of our solution then is to collect information from all the stakeholders. We're going to analyze and organize the data and run some modeling, run some optimization, kind of think about timing and capacities, fleet electrification plans, all of these considerations that we've talked about today. And then we're going to turn that around into a data product or products that we're going to make publicly available to all these same stakeholders, and again, hopefully spur that type of action that we want to see. So the data product that we're talking about using is a GIS story map, but basically you can think of map data and other quantitative data arranged in such a way that it's easy to comprehend and easy to digest. And we'll certainly make that available in a couple of different formats, so that anybody that has an interest in this infrastructure will be able to access it and act on it. Thanks.
Thank you, Nate. Now, at this point, I want to transition to a dialogue with those on the line with us. I think we laid out a good framework for why this is important and possible approaches and constraints. But one of the key components to why we went forward with this application was the idea that this approach could lead to supporting greater job placements, enabling workforce training, so that if we do create these clean energy hubs, that's kind of the next generation of the industrial business zone, to be maybe more the clean industrial business zone, that it's inclusive of a job program or approach where you're seeing neighboring community colleges, vocational schools having first looks, first opportunities at the technology to gather skills where they can really get some type of accreditation or acknowledgement of being on the front lines of learning how to use this technology, whether it's in maintaining the chargers themselves, whether it's in the fleet operation, finding them ways to have an exciting channel in to this new clean energy transition. So that's part of what I want to make sure we have a chance to talk about with those on the line. I thought this video might be a good summary of everything we've talked about for the application, we had to submit a short video. So I thought I could share with you that video, and then we could get into a discussion on how do we bring the pieces together? What do you all see as important next steps? And how should we best organize ourselves to be successful against these outcomes? Before we jump into that, let's see if I can, at this point, share this quick little summary of what we came to. And let's see, give me 2 seconds while this does not work, and then I try again. Let's do this. It'll look like it's not working, and then I can get it to work.
Many of you have probably heard us at Con Edison talking about Zoraga Ave. And for those of you not from the area, Zoraga Ave is in the Southeast Bronx, which is a disadvantaged community area, as well as an EPA pollutant non-attainment area for 8-hour ozone. It's a minority majority area, but there's also a lot of different fleets that are in this region. So Zoraga Ave, for example, is about 2 miles long, and it has about 20 to 25 fleet depots or service areas in that area. And you can see the majority from this orange color here that the majority of them are school buses, but we do have Department of Sanitation for New York, as well as delivery, FedEx. We also have food delivery, logistics companies, transit. There's a lot of cohabitating in this area that if we were to focus our solutions, this would really have a high impact on an area that is really the intersection of 3 different expressways. So it's seeing a lot more of those greenhouse gas emissions. Regarding fleet electrification, a critical obstacle that we can try to overcome in 12 months is really trying to think about developing creative policy and other unique solutions for fleet charging in a dense urban environment.
Medium heavy duty vehicles do tend to cluster in certain areas, such as IBZs, by highways, ports, warehouses, and freight networks. Regarding fleet electrification, a critical obstacle to collectively overcome in 12 months is increasing dedicated truck parking capacity.
For years, industrial business zones, or IBZs, in cities across America have attracted jobs and industry at the expense of community families by creating harmful environmental conditions and growing financial insecurity. Through a series of actionable stakeholder engagements to support an extraordinary coalition of public and private leaders, Electrify Zoraga aims to create a new paradigm where IBZs are clean energy hubs that drive meaningful community revitalization by electrifying truck fleets and creating EV education opportunities and jobs. All right. Yeah, that's doing videos to get a submission in. So it gives you a summary, though, of what the overall aspiration here is. And with that said, I think it'd be great just for those who have listened to what we've shared so far. Could we hear some of your reactions, maybe questions you have on our approach or thoughts you have on how this could be most successful for Zoraga Avenue? Feel free just to raise your hand or come on video so we can get to meet you and introduce yourself. We'd really like to hear from you. And as you're getting ready, I just want to acknowledge, I see that Juan Torres is on. Juan, thank you for just being supportive of the efforts of this group in terms of pulling together this application and helping us be aware of the resources in the Castle Hill neighborhood and also the connection with Matt Berlin and Nice School Bus.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. Just from your experience in community organizing and support, what do you think is an important, what are some important things for us to keep in mind for successful community engagement with this concept?
I think the most important thing that we should be, putting our most efforts on would be the children. When we think about electrifying Zurika Ave, we think about, the community, who lives there, who does it actually affect? And of course, it does affect all types of families, adults, neighboring people, and those neighboring communities. But our children, I think, is our most important, and it should be our effort to be able to reach out to not only the families of those children, but also the environment that they're actually living in. And when you look around the Zariga Ave and just electrifying Zariga Ave in general, you have Hunts Point, Castle Hill, Parchester, Soundview. That's a lot of families there. And within those families, you go through these highways. There's truckings, diesel trucks, diesel school buses, and it passes out through a lot of schools, not only schools for small children, but middle school, high school, and even schools that are for the disabled, for the blind. So I think that's the most important factor that we had to take in.
Thank you. Good feedback there. And maybe for the task force itself, thinking how do we find ways to integrate this effort into potential programs that teachers of those students would be excited about, knowing that this is what we're trying to make happen. Maybe we're going to find some teachers or educators who will get excited about this concept and commitment.
Good afternoon. Oh, let me get I'm Charlene Brown. I'm from the Castle Hill YMCA.
Good to meet you.
I'm just excited to hear about this. We're at the end of Zariga Avenue where Castle Hill and Zariga meet. And I've been here 13 years, and just to see the buses and trucks that go through here and to know that you're moving in a direction that's going to help the community is very meaningful. Castle Hill is about strengthening communities, bringing awareness. So in any aspect that I can support and I can help with this, I would love to be involved with that. And I love the part about the opportunity of working with youth. If there's some kind of way we can maybe put a program in to teach kids how they can get involved in this so they can sustain this in the future as we move forward, I'd be glad to, support and help.
That would be great. That would be really great. I'm struck often by, these fleets. We talk fleets.
Mm-hmm.
Well, those are run by large companies, and a lot of these companies are companies actually leaning in, who have made public commitments to solve for these issues. But often their relationships with communities are not theirs to the extent that they want. So to the extent that this task force has the ability to be a bridge with those fleet operators who really do care about these issues, want to find solutions to overcome these obstacles, and especially if it creates channels for the youth to get involved and have a good experience with their company and their mission, maybe there are ways we can think about this. For instance, site visits for fleet operators who want to have an active role in this, to see, like the Pioneer, Brian, you mentioned, maybe ability to take a group of students to go see what it looks like to see a school bus plugging in at a location and give them a chance to ask a bunch of questions.
Definitely.
Yeah, I think that's great. And Charlene, thank you. We've talked a little bit about the possibility of Castle Hill Y being a spot to convene some of these roundtables, so we have some place in community to have these dialogues and think through things around the workforce training, but also understanding a space for even the civic leaders to talk through how do we make the new win-win that really serves our community with these industrial business zones. Yeah, thank you for that. Just looking through here, Sam, I don't know if you're able to come and just provide an introduction to the work your company does, because you really are on the side of workforce development with Charger Help for this group, if you have a moment.
Yeah, no, thank you for inviting us, HG. We're really excited to see how far you all have come on this project, because we see this as a huge opportunity for folks from disadvantaged communities to transition over to clean tech jobs. And how do you do that? By analyzing how these folks can integrate into the space, what kind of requirements are needed, what kind of partners, what kind of educational institutions need to participate. And you mentioned community colleges. That's an area where we see maintenance technicians being part of the educational system. But I'll take a step back to introduce the company. So Charger Help, we are a women-owned, Black-owned company from Los Angeles, California. We operate nationwide, and we work with all the charging companies to service their charging stations. So we're supporting the network providers, manufacturers, folks that are owning charging stations, so small businesses, utilities. And we're tracking the reliability of the charging infrastructure. We're capturing that data. When we're out on the field, we're tracking that data to help improve on the reliability. We're also supporting in the workforce development. We partner with SAE International to create the first maintenance technician certification that is, I believe, launching in April of this year, which is really exciting. And with the IRA, I heard someone mention the IRA, there's funding for electrification for heavy duty vehicles, and there is some funding there for workforce development and maintenance of the charging station. So we're really excited to see, whatever is developed through this program, that it gets replicated in these areas. Thank you.
Great. Oh, you're welcome. I'm glad to have you on board. You're kind of leading the way nationally on your efforts here. So the idea that you'll be able to be a part of this is exciting. Just looking through who we have on the call, I just want to have an opportunity for others to introduce themselves. Chance, we had a chance to connect on LinkedIn, and you were able to join the call, but I'm not sure if you don't mind just sharing about what Bollinger does and kind of your thoughts on the discussion today. We'll give Chance a second to come off online if he's able to. But others here, I see ELM on the resilience side. A lot of times I think we get into this as, oh, it's a bus or a truck that needs to be charged, and that's what it is. But often it's a whole energy system that needs to be put in place, that so if there's a multi-day outage, that you can still have the services from, whether it's the sanitation trucks or the school buses, still run. So this is more than just plugging in a truck. This is a whole set of systems that have to be established. So Pat and your team at ELM Microgrid, that's your specialty. How do you see kind of those solutions playing a role for industrial business zones for the operators, but then also maybe as a workforce development opportunity?
Yeah, well, so definitely, like you mentioned, we feel that for the grid is going to be a difficult item in this whole thing, because they're going to take a lot of electricity to get all these buses, chargers, or fleets charged. So we find ourselves in a unique opportunity to come in and supplement the grid in order to have the power, not only supplement the grid from a capacity level, but people who are putting in a lot of these chargers are starting to see a lot of demand charges when you go over a certain amount of load at times during the day. So we're able to go in and manage that for everybody as well and help reduce cost. I think that's about it.
Right, and then one of the ways you do that, I think, is with your battery storage solutions. Is that right?
Oh, yes, absolutely. We can put in pretty much any size system. We start at about 30 kilowatts, go up to many megawatts if needed, by paralleling a lot of our systems. So yeah, we're pretty flexible when it comes to that, and then also along with that is a lot of different sizes for footprints, because obviously that's going to be a significant issue in some of these areas and more congested areas.
Yeah. And I just wanted to point that out, that it's not more than plugging in a truck. It's, the backup systems, the battery systems, all these things are areas of where we're going in terms of knowledge that, Juan, back to your point about how do we get the youth excited and engaged. is helping them appreciate all the exciting technology that's connected to this new space that we're going towards.
Yeah, and I guess another thing I'd like to mention as well is we have a management system on our microgrids. So we'll be able to, decide on things like how fast we're charging each vehicle based on, what time of day that came in and what time it needs to go back out, and what the SOC percentage is needed to fulfill the routes of those buses or trucks. So, it's not just a battery providing power. But there are some brains behind it to help with the fleet operators.
Mm-hmm.
And HG, I'm with Pat as well. My name's Josh. One of the things with our controller is we do have some visibility to how all that works. So when you talk about from an education standpoint, there are ways to be able to visually show whether it be people in the community or students, how this power is being routed to certain buses at certain times and why it's important. And from a cost management scenario, there are some visual applications that we can do to help educate people, whether it be from businesses there or students that are into technology and that kind of thing, that can really be a good visual way to see what's actually happening as opposed to just talking about it on paper.
That's great. To the extent we can flip the script here in terms of it being a liability to be living in a place you don't have many options to move from, that is connected to these industrial business zones, to actually being, how lucky am I? I've got a front row seat next to everything that's happening, where all the investment's going, that I get to benefit first. That's a completely different paradigm than the one that we operate in with these industrial business zones. But to change that around so that those schools closest to these industrial business zones have first options to learn about how to benefit from the knowledge and opportunity, not only the clean air and the reduced health cost of living in this community, but also the educational opportunities and then the job opportunities. That's possible. And that's what I'm excited about IBZs, is that the framework is there. It just needs to be updated to meet our current needs as a society.
Yeah.
That needs, and for instance, I'll give you an example. In preparing the application, I was reaching out and talking to different people. I was talking to NYC EDC, that has a big hand in the management of all the industrial business zones in New York. And that led to a conversation with this gentleman, Christopher, who was with, I think I'm going to get it wrong, but Association of Good Neighborhoods or something. And he was just right on point. He said, we've been thinking a lot about how could we adapt the zoning opportunities or requirements for IBZs to have some different trade-offs. So perhaps you're able to build a third story on your facility in IBZ, which you're maybe currently not able to because that's a rule on you. You can't build more than 3 or 2 stories high. But in exchange for that third story, you're willing to make XYZ commitment that would accelerate Con Edison getting all the information they need to know to plan better for the investment, but also maybe all the information necessary to create a program with the school. So that was an exciting piece of feedback I got just from any fleet operators on the call, or someone wants to maybe give that perspective. I know, Ken, previously you were with Verizon, but if there's anyone else on who might want to give the vehicle perspective for the task force, I think that'd be helpful.
I mean, I could talk to it if we don't have anybody else.
Yeah, and I noticed, Chance, you had a chance to come off, maybe come off mute, but if there's a chance to introduce yourself, just let me know. And Kenny, I'll let you jump in from your experience with Verizon to start.
Yeah, sure. And I do a bunch of work in terms of representing other fleet organizations as well, and have a lot of peers in the industry. And we think about, I think we led off, kind of talking about the fact that there is so much transportation it's sort of a gift and a curse, right? It means that there is economic activity happening, The downside of it is sort of, how do we move towards this electric future? And a number of these fleets are providing they're providing critical services, or they, in a lot of cases, small and medium businesses that, those vehicles are the lifeblood of those businesses continuing to generate revenue and provide for, their stakeholders. This is a big unknown for a lot of folks to kind of start to make this pivot in terms of what is it going to mean in terms of operating costs. What do I need to know in order to make the transition? How do I support the transition? What's going to happen during construction, or how am I going to make my selections about vehicles? So there are a lot of, there's a lot of anxiety, so to speak. And the more that folks see examples such as Pioneer and others where folks are actually actively deploying these vehicles, the better it is, for the overall ecosystem, and remove some of that doubt and fear. I think one of the things that comes across, when we talk as a group, is you get to hear all the different perspectives. We know why it needs to happen. We talk about the impact of transportation on greenhouse gas in the United States. What role do fleets play in that greenhouse gas creation? We talk about the policy and the other enablers, make-ready programs, tax incentives, the IRA, et cetera, that allow us to kind of start to pivot. But as I'm listening to this afternoon, I'm kind of thinking about it's like putting on a big event, and we're going to have a caterer and a bunch of different dishes that are going to be served throughout the event. And you just point me at the supermarket and say, there's a bunch of stuff there. The answer is inside there somewhere, right? And we know that all the piece parts are here. And as I listen to everybody today, we've got the policy understanding, we've got the technical understanding, we've got the grid understanding, we've got the community understanding. It's sort of like that supermarket. We know that all the ingredients are inside, and it's really a matter of sort of getting coordinated as a group to accelerate this, right? All the piece parts are there. In some cases, you could argue that the piece parts have been there for some amount of time. And why isn't this moving faster? Because it requires coordination. It requires stakeholder engagement. It requires understanding what the needs of the community, the business community, the residents, the technology providers, the utilities. It requires everybody kind of talking to each other and understanding what's needed, so that we're not tripping over each other and just moving forward for the benefit of all, right? For the benefit of those businesses. One of the things that excites fleets are, the prospect as the vehicles continue to get better and better and better, you can operate these vehicles for a lot less money. They're much more reliable. They're cleaner. They're quieter. They have a number of benefits that businesses, just in a selfish way, are excited to, bring these vehicles into the fold. What they're nervous about is the transition, and, who's going to help them through the transition. And I think, these kinds of conversations help to lift some of that concern, and move forward in a positive way for those businesses, but also in a positive way for the community.
Yeah, that's the part that's what's exciting about this. And for those, we have many of the leaders that signed on in support of that application on the call, but there's some notable ones that weren't able to join that you should be aware of. We have the lead for Department of Sanitation New York, responsible for all those sanitation trucks on Zuriga Avenue. He's part of this group. Clement Drummond, he is with CUNY, who helped kind of lead the way for the training program on EV automotives with CUNY, is part of this group. Dwayne Morris from Soulful Synergy. We have someone from Soulful Synergy here. Who Workforce Clean Energy Academy. It's just an incredible group invested in this. And I think in terms of next steps, the goal here is, yes, we hope to hear a great answer back on March 7th, whether or not this application was successful. But I think this task force is committed regardless to keep the conversation going. And Charlene, I just want to acknowledge your offer to find a way that this potentially can work at Castle Y, to have a conversation with the right players in community. And so we're going to stay in touch with you on figuring out how to do that. And then when we do, we can have opportunities to partner more with Juan Torres and others to figure out who do we want to have in the room to make the best meal possible. And that's the plan. So I want to thank all of you for making time for this call, and those who came on to listen. This is not the end. It's just the beginning of hopefully the most impactful conversation possible regarding flipping the script on industrial business zones to be clean energy hubs. So thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
See you all soon.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Good to see you, Ken.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody. We've got some good notes here to work with, and I think it's a good opportunity just to get in the groove of
Absolutely.
kind of sharing what we're doing and going from there. Thank you.
Take care.